아가상은 동방이 세디 네 디고르 시엔데 나 동방이 세데네 가서 가샤 파 가즈 가네네 지금 동메고래 디네자 동방이 세디 지단 각바던 주번이나네 가르스네다 가바세디레스 다 각바달라야 네 마인가다 메가니 베나네 메가세디레스 온도스네 다 가상가서 디고르 마주시로.
Good morning. So last night we continued to talk about emptiness, and we looked at how, in order to realize emptiness, the object to be negated, the object of negation, needs to be eradicated, negated. And in that way, emptiness is realized. And we also spoke about whether between positive and negative phenomena, which is emptiness is a negative phenomenon. And the negative phenomenon, or negative phenomena, they are divided into two, those which are affirming negations and non-affirming negations. And of those two, emptiness is a non-affirming negation, a non-affirming negative.
강사로 삼당베나다 랑게 풍보티게 삼당베나다 중앙절로야 능수지 간스 능도 선비 파심주게 제형도 갑라 데네 낭나디 아니 디서 유가리네 소소 롤 반낭요디 강라야 마되바 아니 코론 랑궁웨네 코론웨네 줍되바 요바시 능고어레 에세레 제산데 나와나신지 제바제제파 나와나신 누에 민도 제바치디 나와나신 가야메바 동상지파 지게 통고레스 제산디 가자 가시데 가르까고레스네 강라이마다 랑문에 주바 예바디 롱을 파가루 메바차르고 가루 메바차르고 가시네 제산디 롱을 가 롱을 야 되지 나와데 나와나시디 메바 롱을 메바차르데 아니 가루 통고레스네 데니가 가sam디 통고레제데 강라이마다 랑문에 주바 예바디 예바 나와나 예바디 파 가sam지 통고레스 가sam디 이고레스 딩해바데라 돈잉해바데 돈이 똑바로 해야지 언두시네 순거로와.
Last night we also spoke about how to recognize emptiness. So if we take as the object or the basis to be investigated, could be the person or the aggregates, one first sees how it appears to consciousness. This is the indispensable first step. And the way that the object appears to consciousness is as if it is independent, disconnected from everything, fixed or static, as if it exists from its own side by way of its own nature, essence, or characteristics. Thereafter, one investigates. Does the phenomenon exist in the way that it appears or not? Is the appearance in accordance with reality or not? And one investigates and comes to find that the object does not exist in the way that it appears. So the object of negation, the object appearing to be independent, existing from its own side, or the object seeming to be independent, existing from its own side, this is what is sought and not found. The object is empty of existing from its own side. So while seeming that it does exist by way of its own essence or nature, one comes to recognize that it's empty of existing from its own side. So this way, one merely negates that the true existence or inherent existence and realizes that the phenomenon is empty of existing by way of its own nature. And in this way, emptiness is realized.
Dine zadang dirima loyatilia dada rangri lola ling shik char yongwa de dene midu nyamba zamshik and dongsangshik char xings.
Now we return to the text, the final paragraph on page 20, sort of in the middle of it. So here I've just changed the translation a little bit. What appears to the mind is the pure empty state preceded by the object of the mode of apprehension of this consciousness, inherent or true existence, is emptiness. No, sorry. I'm reading it wrong. I'll try again.
Where's the sentence?
Right at the bottom. So in my reading, I read two sentences mixed up. So ignore what I've just said. So we're at the very last sentence at the bottom of page 20. But the translations change slightly. What appears to the mind is the pure empty state preceded by the mere thought. These appearances that ebb and flow do not exist at all. So I'll read it again. What appears to the mind is the pure empty state preceded by the mere thought. These appearances that ebb and flow do not exist at all.
지상 다다 랑레로라 링링시 차용와 대세로 지상 다다 가랑 주기 로라 봐 주고 유디 나요도 간스 난구도 스베 삼다요도 코 강라이 마도 코랑고 뇌네 지편이 유디 봐 주시 난고레제 난용고레스 나 링링기 차용와 대편이지 직법 유디 봐 난고레 차식 차용와 대세 되네 차고레스 다데니게 차와나지 봐 심주지 제바지 나와나신 간이 두에도 제바체네 두 제바체에 가다 가삼질이야 때네 미둑냠 바시 동상지 차시해서 데니 제바치도 갈라야 아니 데니게다 갈라야 뭐도 랑 뇌네 줍도 자기네 민도와 선배게 아니 동상지 차기해서 차랑원신해서
What appears to the mind is a pure empty state preceded by the mere thought. These appearances that ebb and flow do not exist at all. This sentence then describes the process of meditation, which is first to come to recognize how the object appears, and then to investigate to see whether it exists in this way or not. So one first recognizes that the object appears to exist from its own side by way of its own nature. Then one investigates and comes to realize it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And this then is where one realizes the pure empty state, or realizes emptiness. And that realization of emptiness, or the pure empty state, follows investigation, seeking whether the object exists in the way that it appears or not.
데니게 동상 차이가 동상디다 동반이 세디리 에서로 동반이 세디 가자 내시 로려야 난되바디 파 심주체도 가 디게 동백에 다 동상치 셔거스 디 동상디 동반이 세디리 에서죠.
When the object of negation is refuted, or to express it differently, where the object of refutation is negated, that is when emptiness is realized, where one realizes the object is empty of existing in the way that it appears.
데니기 제바체네 동상지 하고 통용의 로디기 진다유르다 진다유르스 데니기 동상디 동바세 동상 차죠 데 동바디 동바니레디 대시 제바체 동상 통근 로디기 진다유세디 디레스 오르다 로디 진다유 랑신남 세드 아니 덴바 매잠데 동이 인베 로디 아니 로디 동이에 봐 인데세 지산 로디 진다유 랑신남 진다유 랑신남 덴바메 매잠 동이 인베 디 로디 동이에 봐 인데세 지산 동상 두세 제바치的동상아지 통연도 진리게 동상디 동반이 세들이 지산 동반이 동상 통 로디 진다유데 가르선 디니게 동상들이에서 그래 동반이래서 진다유래서
The text continues now at the top of page 21. The mere lack of the object of the mode of apprehension of this consciousness, inherent or true existence, is emptiness. Therefore, such an awareness ascertains emptiness. So the meaning of the sentence should be quite clear. The awareness that ascertains or realizes emptiness is realizing that the object is empty of existing by its own nature, inherent, or truly. And that is the object of the mode of apprehension of this consciousness, inherent or true existence. And realizing that the object is empty of existing in this way, emptiness is realized.
또 짐주지도 덴바 매잠서 덴바스 곧 뭐니 데네 매바자베 통용도 데네게 통해야지 동바 동삼데 동이래 제사디 로지기 디토도 또바들란 동이 또바래라고 그래지네 동이게 봐 인디에서.
So, ascertaining or realizing emptiness is when one realizes that the object is empty of true existence. And here, when one realizes emptiness, one is realizing emptiness or realizing the pure empty state. All that appears is emptiness, the pure empty state.
dine zada dine gi pe nga ju ge da tu sigur sum gore a ju ge dang bo dong ba ni nga ju ge do yo ma da dong ba ni je ba do ya ge don da la nga ju je ba kan chi go re si de dang bo khron le ya an yu pe nga ju ga sa tian do dong ba ni ji je ba chi gi na dang bo ga sa de le lo le na ta kan nang ge do si pe ge sam dang go re da ga sa sam ma da ba je so su ge su bung di so su ge su gi phung bo di da di tiendo 동반이 제바체이나 담보 수기 풍보디 아주 로레 간에 차기도 디 삼당 거래. 나디 멤비가는 이제 괜히 치료기 행동으로 보시게. 대 행동 디 tiendo 동반이 제바치기에나 대 시디 제바시디 행동 될이야. 덴바 동반이 디 제바치기에나 근데 행동 디 아주 로레야 나도 간에 쓴당기도 시비게 디 삼당 거래. 담보 디 삼당 거래제.
Let's just take a few moments to go through this meditation process that one engages in here. The first step is one decides which object one is going to investigate how it exists in reality. So one may well start with the person, and if one does start with the person, the first step of the meditation is to come to recognize how the person appears to consciousness. Or if one decides, rather than the person, one's going to take any of the aggregates. So for example, one may take the form aggregate, the body. How does one's body appear to consciousness? Or if one decides, actually, I'd like to analyze an external phenomenon, then it takes something like a tree. How does that appear to consciousness? So what you see here is the first step is whatever the object is, the first step is to come to recognize how the object appears to consciousness.
안디나 시에 당아 저게 풍부한 안에다 디나요 초와다 두시에다 두시 넘버 10 풍부 다 초와디 템버 간스도세 초와딩도 안 템버 주 동반이세 제바치기나 당보 초와디 초와세야 돼 하고 와제 디는 초와디 파 롤 방안도 초와선 나요도 간스 난기도 세비 나타디 다 대신나 셰바 지바리 다 나타디 하고 디는 넘버 10발 제바체바나 넘버 10바디 난조야 롤 나도 당보 넘버 10바 롤이야 간스 난기도 나타디 하고 당보디 하고 와라.
And if one wants to investigate the aggregates, but rather than starting, say, with the body, one decides, actually, I want to investigate feelings. So then, having decided on the object, one needs to come to recognize how feelings appear to consciousness. Or if one wants to look at consciousness itself, how does consciousness appear to consciousness?
어디네 자 당보 나타데 하고 오래지 다데네게 가 저기 다 도스네 당아 저기 시 강사로 때디 가 저다 강사로 삼다베네 당아 저기 당보 나 세지 가 삼나려로 받아 제사다 나 집에 삼로 시다 삼다데 제사 나 집에 삼로 될이야 나데 능고로 받아 데디 간에스 능고도 시비다 나세 삼당한디 로현다진 로디로와 nga sebe samdang lo de le nga di ganis nangudu sebe tahan lo di rang gi chamba de shi disu ge ji gor wa de lo shanda ji ge de gor wa da lo shanda ji ge jeba ji gor wa lo de le ganis nangudu ji du ganis nangudu sebe du sta ya de kabla ane nga se di ji nga se lo ba na du phung bo de le ko me de ba che lo pa sha ba la ma de ba che shen gang la ma de khorong 그런 랑기 원에 링기 유에 바직 코로파니 유에 바직 예 롤반 지난거 능고래 제래 대디 낭나디 야고자 되네 낭나디 세봉 어선 사나 대디 낭나디 라신 주반 낭탕 데머 주반 낭탕들이 예제래
Thus far then I've mentioned examples of differing objects that one can take. So if you decide on the person, then the first step, like with any object, is how does it appear to consciousness? So we're taking the eye. So here we need to see or understand how the eye appears to consciousness. And to do this, we use the of our companions in our meditation, those of mindfulness and vigilant introspection. We use vigilant introspection, which is of the class of wisdom, to investigate how the eye appears. So we do analysis here to come to recognize how the eye appears to consciousness. We come to see that it appears to be independent, not dependent on anything at all. It appears to be fixed, static, unconnected. In other words, truly existent by way of its own nature or essence. This is how it appears to consciousness. This is how it appears to exist to consciousness by way of its own nature or essence.
that tempe zine anti chelia ngan juge da sherap ki cheba chi wor da tin na na hin jik da kan syung go re se be sheba sherap ki cheba chi ju phungpo la ma de ba na ga de cha gi de tue na kan ya gi du phungpo na de ma de ba nan go ro phungpo la ma de ba kan yung gu du si dine gi du sin cheba chi du an phungpo la ma de ba ga sa chue ba na phungpo de me ba cha na ga sa de la gu de la gu me do and then 풍보래야 다 주기 풍보다 초의 풍보도 싶어 남바시 풍보가 뭐 강로래 강라야 되게 되면서 봐다 수기 풍보래 제바제 되면 돼 제바제 다 수기 풍보라 맞대봐 강사세 로소 샤라기 민심비게다 제바치도 통용 거로 봐 안도도 제바제 간섬질레만 차차차 시럽게 제바제 로도 안데 간섬질레 갈리고 그러선 다가 직럴 현질레 맞대봐 그런 뭐네 줍되면서 코페닝 아주 나와 나신지 자기니 민도 선배 다 동상한테 맞도 이거 말 통거 말 다 동상하지 통은 거래 세상 동상한테 통 되니 제발 동상에 통어도 될랭 해봐 다 동상한테 맞도 민도 선배 셈 해봐 탈지 뭐 지기여도 안 될래 동반이 또 말해 해야지 어두 순 거로 받아
To investigate then how the I appears to consciousness. And then with mindfulness, when we come to recognize how the I appears to consciousness, with mindfulness we hold the object. So mindfulness is perhaps best translated as recollection. So the purpose of mindfulness is to recall the object, to keep it in mind. Then, whilst mindfulness, the mental factor of mindfulness, is recalling or keeping the object in mind, the mental factor of wisdom or intelligence, this is then used to investigate. And investigate through thinking about the consequences. So if the I exists in the way that it appears, as by way of its own essence and therefore independent, what would it be independent of? Because it seems to be disconnected from everything. So independent or disconnected from the five aggregates. So is it sustainable? Is it really possible that the I is independent of the body? That the body has no impact on the I? That the aggregate of feeling is really disconnected from or unconnected, unrelated, or has no impact on the I? Is that really possible? And so forth. So we're using here, now first we used vigilant introspection, thereafter mindfulness, and now thirdly we are also using intelligence or wisdom to investigate in this way, looking at the consequences that would follow if the way the I appears to exist is how it actually exists. And we repeatedly come to see that the I cannot be independent, cannot exist independently, despite appearing so, cannot exist by way of its own nature or from its own side, despite appearing so. At this point, one comes to realize emptiness. The pure empty state appears. One realizes that the object is empty of existing in the way that it appears.
Denigi that Dongsang Chik Do and the Kabla, Denigi Dongsang Chik Dobi, Dehi Dobigi that Denigi sometime to be Kabla, Kansa de Yomarwata, Kansa Yomakaya, Dongsang Chimado Tungo Marwata, Yomarwa, Dongsang Chimado. She's not Dongsang the Dongba Yidra, Dongsang the Dongba Yimada, Shanghai Tungoma, the Kansa Yomare, the Dongsang Mata, Kansa Tungo Maro. And that who she Dosevicella, Dene that Dongsang Chimado, Kaya Tungme, Kansa de Deji. 매반 통구 매바자 다디 또 세위 제례야 삼로 양자시 양자선 다 강사들이 요래요 요미 저기는 매바레베 세베게 삼로 직리용으로다 매바레베 파 직대 동산마도 통해 미지산 강사들이 다 매바레베 삼당에도 지산 강사 제디 뢰파 다바 점지 현지를 되네 하로 뢰 다바 점기 여바디 하고 두고 그래 지산 다 디가 소다 군주 참모다 하고 그래 또 말해서 그래 진짜 군주 참모 또 말해서 진짜 랑게 원녀 나와 나신 제바진나 랑게 원녀 두바디 민두데 이내 강사데 매바레미도 강사데 두스 진짜 풍벌에 되네 뢰파 샤바 점이 두스 진짜 또베 다바 점이 두스야 돼 어두스 하고 두고 그래지 군주 참모 두고 그래지 참모다 라바세 지어와 진짜 군주 참모세 군주 뎀바세 지어와 군주 뒤에 동이 많이 되려 군주来个와 뭔가 다 싸워 이마 냐마 망올라사 그래서 전에 저거 군주 뎀바세요 군주 되려 군주 참모 두고 그래서 말면 군주 참모도 두고 그래지 그래서 뎀바 마도 강사 되지 강사 제바지도 강사디 제바지 나와나 동상이 통고로 와 동상 또 돈이 또 동상지마도 강사 통고 말아 강사 요 말아 와 통고 말아 다는 강사 매바레베스도 삼는 디젤이야 삼는 가르고선 강사 매바레베 삼는 가르 통람상 가르하고 그래서는 강사 세디 진지라 뢰파 다바 점기도 세하고 그래지래 디하고도 군주 참모세 또 바레스 제가 강사 세디 나와데시 만줄로라 나와나시 랑응외는 두바디 민두때 진지라 되네 다바 점기도 세하고도 그래지 제가 디가서다 우메게 람 우망원이 하고 두고 그래서 랑응외는 두바디 매바제 早一年没把呀买一把，然后绿帕大把这么些，现绿帕大把这民给大把这也把它糊涂过来去了。啊，这个是第来美国人。
When one realizes through going through this process of first seeing how the phenomenon, the I, appears, then whilst using mindfulness and vigilant introspection, now also using intelligence or wisdom, when one investigates through reasoning, one comes to recognize that the person does not exist at all in the way that it appears, not even slightly. And this is when the pure empty state appears and emptiness is realized. Thereafter, another consciousness arises, another thought, conceptual consciousness, a thought arises. It's not that the self doesn't exist at all in its entirety. There is a conventional self, and that exists merely labeled by mind. So here one realizes subtle conventional truth, and one attains the actual path of the middle way, the path between the extremes of existence and nihilism, where the path that is between the view that the self exists by way of its own nature and between the view that the self doesn't exist at all. Here one realizes the self does not exist at all in the way that it appears, but it does exist as a mere dependent arising, in particular, dependent on labeling by mind. And that last step, recognizing dependency, is the realization of subtle conventional truth.
Gansa se dengan zulu yore yomare se ngui ni sule gansa de kan chi yore lamda rang ngui ne chup de ba je zawa de mya ba je rang ngui ne ma chu ba je xian la ma tyo ba rang ngui ne ma chu ba je xian la ma tyo ba rang ngui ne ma chu ba re de xian la ma tyo ba je rang ngui ne ma chu ba re de ine ko ro chup de yore se da kan chi yore se xian chi le due ne pa lue pa da ba zhen ge xue ba de se je san chue kan de xin na de di hao go yo de ne chue shi 가르치 풍부에 때도 삼다베 나다 다지 멤비게 chue 하나 저기 치료비 수당 네 신도하다 매도라서 가르 삼다 남사 대시가 저 대시 가사 될 제바치도 당번 낭타데 삼다 나와네 될이야 아니 잼비게 진 되네 셰럽게 파 제바치 윤능부지 고고로 된 동반이 또 봐라 네 고고 다 되네게 게 동반이 디 가사 때도 되네 체명에 차비 제라 남사 시가리 때도 지 삼다베네 Lamsa to re che ko di ma na shin ko jumse mo sam dang go yo ma re che lamsa to re che Dele samno mangbu dang gu do gang dan nang thang ga de dang gu do na wa na shin du ye mi du che ba mo she che ba jin mangbu do gu do de ne che ba jin de dong ban yi do gu do 마 가사 얘기하게 섬다 가사데 나와 나신 대시 가사데 낭탕데 가니스 두세 디파송 데 나와 나신지다 누구의 민도 샹레 뛰기도 뛰기도 젠지게들 제바지로 와다 디 제바지네다 샹라마 뛰어바지 민도 선배게다 동이 또 용래지로 와 마 가사 간디 샤구레서 야게의 섬당 시쇼 말봐 gansa de lo le nang yo de gan nang du gu che da jing wo dang bo di ro wa da che ba chi de ka lo le nang yo de gan ngo nang du se che ba chi de sam ta de ka la gang la ma do kho rang ngwe ne du be nang go re che che sa gansa gang la ma do rang ngwe ne du ba na wa na xin ji da di du ge mi du che ba che ro wa de che ba che de ka ri ne tian ji ge sam ta che ba che de ane ga sam che le ta ma de ga sa gang la ma do rang ngwe ne du ba zao de min du se be dong sa chi du go re che di xi go ro wa Dito sawe chela ane karha kukurese de gansa dida xianji le duene luepa daba zeng yueba da hutu kure echerwa. Dito bala de yunrubu goguduwa sam mungu tang kuruwa. Da di gansa di hago sawe chela, ceme ngeba nye sawe chela, ane yu kare tendu chokse da, xingdo da, dine samtang lamsa to kure, nyema nashin yunrubu samtang goyo ma rechere, lamsa to tu kure echer, de duena dire.
Here, the meditator is taken as their object, the person or the I, have taken it as their object to investigate, to see how it exists in reality. So that is the objective. How does the object, in this case the person, exist in reality? And the process started with, so this is how it appears to me, this is how I think, I believe it exists. I live my life under the influence of this belief that the I exists in the way that it appears, independently. Then one investigates and comes to recognize it does not exist in this way, not at all. It does not exist from its own side or by way of its own nature, essence, or characteristics. It is empty of existing in that way. It's not independent, despite appearing so. So there is the realization of emptiness. That then is followed by the thought, but it does still exist conventionally. How so? Dependently. Dependent on labeling by mind. So it's empty of existing independently, but the way it exists conventionally is dependent on labeling by mind. One goes through this process again and again and again. Especially the steps of coming to recognize how the object appears, and then using reasoning, our intelligence. What are the consequences if the object existed in the way that it appears? And repeatedly coming to see, but it just cannot exist in this way. It does not exist in this way. When one comes to recognize that the object is empty, or in this case the person, the self, is empty of existing in the way that it appears, but exists dependently, then one can, in the meditation, shift to another object. So as I said in a few segments ago, one can investigate the person, one can investigate the aggregates, the body, feeling, consciousness, or one can investigate an external phenomenon such as a tree. The process is identical. One just changes the object. What will differ, though, is that in relation to the quality of the meditation on the initial object, the self, the I, in dependence on that, the quality, or in relation to that quality of that meditation, the same meditation now just on a different object, will be very quick. Because you've done the analysis many times, you're very familiar with this way of thinking, that how the object appears and the consequences of it existing in this way, and recognizing that it cannot. So therefore, with differing objects, one will come to the same quality of realization as previously, due to the immense familiarity with the process of reasoning.
멜로나기 제신이 수행해서 멜로나기 제신하는주기 셰고를 파다 소수 동도 다연데 갑라 당하는줄에 간스난기 둘랍나 페니 셰고나는 동데 하나랑게 동 소수랑게 동 임바디 직 가지 와실에 나는데 갑로라 파나도 갑라 페기 통하게 디 지게 수년디 동데 소수랑게 동 임바시 난거래 난거와 이내 당하는주기 두 삼다디 갑라 다 소소나 동 많이 받 소소하고 그러와 그디 다다도 소소나 동이 받이 난거리네 소소나 동 많이 받 세부하고 두고 그러와 제사다 대시 되니그 수년 나라 샤야 되걸 소소게 동 임바 나신 나와 나신지 소소게 동이 임바 있나 임바 있는다 가요레스 디 푸니 샤와 따지 소소게 동이 난거로와 되니그 왕 아줄레 왕시 셰발레 왕시 미기 셰발레 나 되기 수디 동디 소소라는 게 동이 임바 있나 당 아주 가리스 난거도서는 아주단 저와 메딘 파스틸 유디겐 파라델 저기니 메딘이 지는 거로 있는 거때 이나디 저와 메딘이 소소 동원에 임바 있는 거래 지사도스 난게도 갑라 딩이 동원에 임바 있나 되네 네 수보단 저와 메바 차도 부도 저와 메는 디 동디 원에 있나 네 수보단 저와 델레 자르요 말에 델레네 파타르고 말에 아니 셔고 나로 여러베 셔고 나하는 요 말에 아니 셔고 다 안지기 니 동이 바살라들 여러베는 디하요 말 두 심지체베나 니 동원에 임바디 기네요 말이다 동원에 임바디 요 말 동원에 나와 나신 동원에 임바 나와 나신 동원에 임바디 다 매바데요 매바 하고도 그러와 되네 인자 마주기 매바 하고 두고 제사데 되네 하고 두완자 마주 수있다베네 페니 동원에 임바 난거데네 니 동마레 선배 삼론마도 딩이 동레 선배 삼론도 유니 용고 말아가지고 니 동원에 레서배 삼론 유니 용고 말아가서 지 수년지레마도 니 동원에 마레 선배 삼론 리고래 디레바 가르제레스는 동원에 많이 받 소소 설명해봐 니고로 봐 내반자 동원에 받는 거데네 동원에 레서배 삼론도 유니 용고 말아 동원에 많이 방하는 체매 또 살아와 체매 또 살아와 인장의 동원에서 배삼도 유니리고 말아와 제가 되네서 디 나야라 아 동원에 임바 능고르데 이내 아솔 동원에서 배삼도 유니 연구 말 매바데 가르선 디노 소수기 동원에 많이 받이 소수기 체명해 봐라와 제산 가오 제바제 리로와데 소소 동데 자르도야 말와디 파디두스네 파라 파쇼데 동고라 제산 대란 민도 말와디 말와 나는 paradia 말에 두셔와 나래 말에 나는 가와도 세네 안지 동원의 인바디 녀며 말 동원의 인바디는 소소수고를 잘 되고 가지고로
Here one can also use illustrations to reflect on, so as to deepen our understanding. One being using that of a reflection. So if we take a reflection of our own face in the mirror, the way the reflection appears to our mind is as if it were our face. There's not the natural thought that this is a reflection. We rather perceive it as being my face. Intellectually, we can a moment later remind ourselves, of course it's a reflection, but what appears to us, that is our face. What naturally, spontaneously appears to us that is our face. But if it were our actual face, we should find it then. Because here we have again, without investigating, before us is our actual face. This is how it appears to us. If we think about it, of course, it's a reflection, but it appears as if our actual face and this appearance are unrelated. There's a disconnect between them. They are cut off, separate from each other. But if we investigate to see if our actual face exists in the way that it appears, we should find it somewhere. And the appearance is here before us, appearing as separate from our perceiving consciousness, disconnected from our perceiving consciousness. But our face cannot be found in the mirror. Our face cannot be found in the space between the mirror and our body. And through this process of analysis, looking at using reasoning, using our intelligence to use reasoning and consequences, we recognize that our face, that this appearance, this appearance of our face cannot be our actual face. It can only but be a reflection. When we think about this again and again, we'll give rise to a valid cognizer, realizing that this is a reflection and not our face. Which means that when we see a reflection again, we will not have the spontaneous thought, oh, this is my actual face. We won't have that same confusion again because we have generated a valid cognizer recognizing that this is not our face but a reflection.
Tisa dine ki melon na yo sunyin soso dong yinba nashin nawa nashin soso dong chi soso dong yinba yina soso supo dan jewa me ting soso dong chi xiao chi urwa. Tisa di xiao yina ane jewa me na soso le dong ni cha di urwa. Soso supo dan jewa yuken dong chi dan jewa me ting dong ni cha urwa. Tisa di jewa me kin dong chi yueba yina da gawa yor shirwa nanglo yorbe shirwa da dong ki paradi lo yorbe. Sene jeba china dine ngwene dong yinba di rangi dong ngwene yinba di nye gyune merwa, chesa mewanza ane karak chagorasene chesa di dong yinba nashin na ngwene yinba nangor di ngwene mare asambe samla di sosugi su dong naya sungyen chego naya dong ngwene yinba nangor di ine di nge dong ngwene mare asambe samla dugorwa, chesa di dugorwa. Dine to sewe cheliya nga zuki to banza dong jixi melwa nala sungyen gane chabine 이 동문에 레선배 농문에 난거디나 나와 나중에 동 말에 선배 삼로지마도 그디 가와시고나 통배네 지금 아주 제 총화 친구나로도 지금 먹고 시원하나 수부 먹고 샤워도 소스 집부게 되네 샤워도 소스 임만 난거 나와나 어디 나와 나중 아 말에 선배 곧 그디나 나와 나중 응원에 말에 선배 삼로디 되네 통화도 삼로디 내용으로마도 어디 나와나지 나 인다이면나 선배다 나래 선배 신바들이야 말와 당아주 수년을 시작하도
The way that a reflection appears to our mind is as if it is separate, disconnected from our body, almost as if we had two faces, one appearing in the mirror and this one here. But if what was appearing in the mirror really were our face, it should be found. But where? It's not in the form that is the mirror. It's not in the frame of the mirror. It's not in the intervening space between our face and the mirror. Therefore, the reflection is not our face. It is merely a reflection. And when we come to understand this, not intellectually, because that's very clear, but we come to realize it with a valid cognizer, we will no longer be deceived by a reflection appearing as anything other than a reflection of our face. In other words, we will no longer be deceived by it as being our actual face. And then if we were to, for example, go to a shopping center where there are many mirrors and glass windows, and therefore we see our reflection often, every time we see our reflection, we'll recognize it as being a mere reflection.
나와 나신 말에 삼레 투고와 디나시 대시 가서 동반이 세 또 체위 체라 유카르치 나베네 대시 수년 딩아서 응원에 임반 나와 나신 유가서 똑발 파나야 되까블라 그런 랑원에 요바 능고래 디나와 능고르데 이네 삼노나라 카르선 원나와 나신 싸우기는 요 말에 삼베 삼로시 리고다 동이 또 체위 체라 대시 가서 수년 딩아 소소라나 능고르데 나와 나시데 가 말에 세베 삼로 줘로 봐. 그디나 삼을 한기지 리투고로 봐. 어디 나신가서 동반이 또 세베지라 유 가르스나메 나는도 갑려가서 랑원도 또 난거 나와 나신스 자와기는 메아 세베 삼로시마도 어나와 나시디 두 세베 짐바긴 리고 마. 제자 나와 나시 자와기는 용고 말. 요 말에 세베다 두시네 삼로디 딜리고레제. 그래서 뭐 어디 가서 그 동반이 또 차와인자 나요도 나와 낭수다 니수 미팅바디 제바제 또 차원자 되는 나요도 그다 나와 나신지 자위네요 말에 선배 삼로마도 나와 나신지越南面的 삼바 도바세야다 두 선배 삼로지네 용 말에 제자지 되네자 나와 나신 네 두신 요 말에 세지 삼로 리기 해지래 제자 나가 주테래 동이 또 세베지란 최가를 나는 규마다 보세야지 디래다 규마다 보는 거래서 규마도 통고래서 진짜 나 나신원이에요 말에 선배 삼려봐인자 리그요바 최담지 규마다고 통하세요. 최가래 통하는데 디나시리 해서지.
The illustration of a reflection is useful to recall to mind, because just like someone who has investigated a reflection and has realized that our face that appears before us does not exist in the way that it appears. So a person has realized that this appearance of my face does not exist in the way that it appears. The person who has realized that, with a valid cognizer, will never be deceived by thinking that a reflection exists in the way that it appears. Similarly, when a yogin has realized that the object of their meditation, for example, the I, the self, does not exist in the way that it appears, that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears, but it's not completely non-existent, but exists conventionally merely dependent on labeling by mind. The yogin who has realized that with a valid cognizer will no longer be deceived by the appearance of any object. In meditation, they can take that understanding then from the initial object, such as the self, and apply it to any and every other object rapidly in relation to the quality of their prior analysis, and realize this too does not exist in the way that it appears. This third object also is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And such a yogin then will no longer be deceived by whatever they apprehend, their consciousness, their mind apprehends. They'll never be deceived thinking it exists in the way that it appears, because of the power of their realization of emptiness. So therefore, after such a realization, whatever appears to consciousness of such a yogin will appear as being like an illusion, as something that does not exist in the way that appears, that does not exist independently, but has come about in dependence on causes, such as labeling by mind.
Bendigo dong de sunyen sha de sunyen ji dong de sunyen je sha go de dong sha de ka bla ngwe ne yin ba xian neng go lu wa dong ngwe ne yin ba neng go ji dan da dong ngwe ne yin ba na wa na xin de dong de ngwe ne yin ba na wa na xin ji yo ma de yi ne na de ge sunyen de yo re yo ma re la na di yo ro ba da ka se ne na de sunyen de le de ne nga zo jia wo mong bu ji lia ga mong bu le tu jie tu go lo wa be ne di ge na wa sunyen de le de ne yo re ka se di 자와 지고래 자와 지도고 될 때에 가르는 거라서는 수인 될 때에 가르도 동을야 가르 교행 가르 차상도 뒤매봐 쓰고 뒤직도와 마유 뒤직 차상 균지 제야다 제도고 지사디 수인 될 때 지사 수인 될 때에 지사 나와 수인데 나와 수인도 요래요 말씀 수인도 요래다 수인데 랑게 동원에 바 나와 나신도 요 말이다 나와 나신지 동원에 바 나와 나신도 수 yo marati na sunyen di mewa mares sunyen yo re chere tan sunyen di de do tu tambo di sheshe.
The position we're in now is we see a reflection of something such as our face, and innately to our consciousness it appears as our face. But if we investigate, we quickly recognize that it's not our actual face, therefore it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. That being said, though, a form is appearing in the reflection, or in the mirror as a reflection. So the reflection itself exists. And how can we say that? Because it performs a function. So what would be the function of our reflected face? So that we can look for any perfections and maybe see none. So the reflection of our face performs a function. It exists. But it doesn't exist in the way that it appears as our actual face.
ane melon da dongweni dinyi dune ane 주고 데라 ane dinyi yoba 진 지금 너구 나라진다 샤야 말 왜 구고 왜 구고래 melon 구고래 소소게 동원해지 제가 melon da 소소 동원에다 왜다 되네 괜찮아 초어도 주연지 샤용 거리다 수년 샤용 그거를 랑공원에 주요 말다 수년의 랑공원에 주요 말다 그래서 melon 때 melon da ane 가서 외다 소소 동원에 니 숨디 초요 발라 초백이 견데서 초양도 동묘도 안에 수년지 샤용 거래 디나데 견직마사나 소소 동원에 메나 멜로다 외여나서 동 수년 샤요 말와 디나시 소소 외여 봐 소소 동원에 봐나 멜로데 메나 내는 소소 수년 샤요 말해 다 소소 동다 안에 지게 멜로니 여봐네 왜 메나 너구나를 따베네 동 샤요 말해 제가 디네자 긴 숨데 숨 초발에 때네 아니 가서 오는 중간 저기 가서 수년데 샤용 거래 진짜 수년데 간디 수년 두스 수년 샤에 수년데 두스 간디 두스네 랑원에 민도 걸 현재 멜로다 동다 외다 현재를 되네 긴 총도 직샤용 두스 제가 델라 샤요 델라 때네 저기 자와지 두야다 din 여바 책도 와서 대비로 뒤로와다
As I said in the previous segment, the reflection is an existent, it exists. And how so? Independent on a number of causes. It depends, the reflection is a dependent on a mirror, the face, and light. Without such causes, there can be no reflection. If there's no mirror, there will be no reflection of a face. If there's no face before the mirror, there'll be no reflection of a face. And if the bathroom light hasn't been turned on, there'll be no reflection of anything at all. But when those causes are all aggregated, the result will come, and the reflection will appear.
Delapa, Lupa, Shapa, Tene, Gasa, the two Yongores, Chesa, Dashi, Deta, Dobe, Lo, Ni, Chopale, Tene, Gasa, two Yongores. Dashima, Dasi, Shijura, Dashi Sora, Ming Dasa, Dashi, Dapi, Shi Dedan, Shi Dela, Chichita, Delapa, Lupa, Tapale, Tene, Dini, Chopale, Tene, and the Gasa, two Yongores, Gasa Yore. Chesa di Gasa di, Gasa Yobadi, Shen, Pumbo, Dashi, Dan, Lupa, Ni, Daba, Chopala, Tene, Gasa di Tukungore. Chesa di Gasa Deli Digi, Manzuki, Javaji, Padova, Dan, Lasso, and Jiki Kari, Gomja, Lasso, Shan Jiki, Javaji, Pembi, Javaji, DJ, Chesa Gasa di Tinigi. Pumbo, Dashi, Pumbo, Lupa, Daba, Dini, Chopala, Tene, and the Sola Tene, Gasa, Tugon, Di Gasa di Anzulia, Javaji, Tukore, this is Sungan, the Jibare, Betinaji.
Holding in mind then the different points of the illustration about the reflection, we go back to the illustration of the person. So the person appears just like the reflected face as being existence in the way that it appears, as existent from its own side, as independent, unconnected from anything at all. So just like the reflected face appears to consciousness as being our actual face, so too the way the person or the I appears to consciousness is as if it is self-existent, independent. But despite appearing to consciousness in this way, when we investigate, we recognize, but it is dependent. It may appear, and I may interact with it as if it were independent, but is actually dependent on the aggregates. The person, the I, the self, is dependent on the aggregates. And the aggregates are the basis, the aggregation of the aggregates are the basis upon which self is imputed. So therefore, we see that the self cannot be independent, but is dependent. Dependent on the aggregates, and upon the aggregation of aggregates, self being imputed by mind.
Dongi sungen ya maras chesa dongi sungen shawala melon da melon gi kasore melon da dongi ni ga lo chogo gores adina shi gasa se di dashi di mena pa da kan lo ju be ne gasa ya mare dashi di mena da kan lo ju be ne ya gasa ya mare ya dashi ju be ne ya del ya ta be pa da kan lo mena gasa ya mare 제상 다시다 파 다시 될 파르 따비기 로 다가 로니 소발에 되네 가사들이 거래 가사 두고 거래 제 가사 용 거래 제상 멜론다 뭐기 동문에 니 소발에 되네 멜론 동기 수년의 주바 나신 다시 메나 도지글로 예나야 가사 용 말에 도지글로 되나야 다시 되면은 아니 가사요 말 제상 다시 되다 될 다시 될 뢰파 다발에 되네 근데 가사에 두고 그래 제상 가사세 제상 신치를 뛰네 두고 그래서 진짜 맞춰봐 싸우기는 요 말에서 디스고 단단하다
bringing the two illustrations together. If there is no mirror, there can be no reflection of a face. If there is no face before the mirror, there can be no reflection of a face in the mirror. Very easy to understand that the causes need to be aggregated for the resultant reflection to arise. So too with the person. If there is no basis of imputation, the aggregation of the aggregates, but only an imputing mind, there can be no person. And vice versa. If there were to be a basis of imputation, a collection of aggregates, but no mind imputing person onto them, there would be no person. So with both illustrations of the reflection and the person, they both appear to consciousness in the same way as independent. But upon investigation, they both are dependent.
Gansa said that Dashi Dedan, Lupa Tapala, Dene, Gansa de Junguisa, Gansa de Shinchile, Dune Juba, the Dinkin, Java Jua, Dindere, Jizan did Dusin, that Dindere, Dusin, Jizan, Jigla, Dune, Jigujungores, Dune Jujungores, Jizan Madova Duya Mere, Jigil, Dune Jujungor, as Jig Dashi Dang, part of Lord Teller, Dune, Gansa Jujung to us, Jizan Dune Jugores, Jizan Dindere, said Lucian that. 최근에 시내다 최 여바 차상 가는 시내 뛰는 줍대 봐지마도 맞어 봐줘야 요 말이야. 진짜 된대야 사이트 송을.
What we see with the person is that for there to be a person, there has to be a basis upon which person can be imputed, the collection of the aggregates, and not only the basis. There needs to be the imputing mind. So there's the basis of imputation and the imputing mind. Both are required for there to be a person. So therefore, the person is a dependent arising. The person is not independent because it requires a basis of imputation and imputation by mind. So therefore, it cannot be independent, but is dependent. And this then, this understanding of dependent arising, we need to apply to all classes of phenomena because they are all dependent on causes, parts, and in particular, labeling by mind. So therefore, everything that exists is a dependent arising, exists dependently. Everything that exists dependently.
Rashing to be done, then a Gansadi, part Shenchil, doing a Tawa Zamji, doing a Tawa Zami to be Juba, the how go you do? The how go by the get some not to get chick some Shandali and use Mambuchilia and some catching push down to go.
This understanding of dependence arising, in particular, dependence on labeling by mind, that we've come to, that are presented now in relation to the person, this needs to be applied vastly or in a very broad manner or to a broad number of objects.
지산 다디 풍보 될라 뛰네 개와 치미기 직 두고 얼마도 다디 풍보디 매나 개와 치마세 두여요 용하여 말 지산 개와 치마기 띠엔다 지기샤 먼저 줍세게다 현대에서 개와 치마기라 개세기 지가 미로치나 파마다 차상 세시다 룸바다 파마다 차상 여바이네 소수게 다디 풍보디 매나 아니 개와 치마데 가서 풍보를 렌두고 말해 안 다당 안으로 풍보 주여바이나 야 개와 치마 렌세게 사지다 아니지 파마라서 바디기 지 매나 다디도 여바이네 개와 치마 렌투야 말 제사당 안서 개와 치마 렌세도 다당 안으로 줄라 풍보디 여바체 안디 몽바네 용세게 희께세기 시 사지다 댄세게 아니 파마라서 바다 여바이나 니니 초발에 때네 다당 안서 개와 풍보디기 genje mani ma ka chikewa chema chike dusjina mirik kebane pamada dene cheje Dine ya kechi kewa shili nukuru. Chesa dine eza zuge dade pungpo di kewa chima di kesegi tenji tingore, dele tingore. Chesa tingore. Chesa dine eza zuge tense di dade di tanga pungpo la di sugi pungpo jibulu goya ma sugi pungpo tsoyo di nambarshi pungpo dachi di ondus chine chasang kukuru wa. Dine eza di kukuru. Dima to dima tenpa na yuhayo ma re. Kewa chima yung tuku ma re. Chesa dine mena 근데 개와 치마는 개왕 아마요 말이야. 제자들이 개왕아 치매바 차로. 제자들이서 개왕 아마는 치마 여바디 직질에 떼네 안 주용 거래 제래와.
This process of dependency then, as I just said, should be applied broadly so as to deepen this realization, to integrate this realization deep within us. So to take something that may seem a bit abstract, but take reincarnation. So if we think about a future life, our life immediately following this one, that is a dependent arising. It is dependent on this life's aggregates. So for example, if our future place of rebirth and our future parents, those are causes that are required for a rebirth, are accumulated, those causes are there, but our aggregates are missing, how can it be said we'll be born there? Similarly, if the place of our rebirth, perhaps the particular hospital, if the place of our rebirth is there, our aggregates are ready to take rebirth there, but our parents, they are not sleeping together, there's no conception, how can we be born there? So therefore, we see that our future life is also a dependent arising. It's dependent on all five of our aggregates as well as other causes. Moreover, the concept of a future life is also dependent on a present life, and the concept of a past life is also dependent on a present life. So what we see, reincarnation in its continuity, is mutually dependent. It's not independent.
안 가르고서네 주게 인지 고매가 남된 제겐 라마 암된바 상예 좀내게 좀내 투제지 고고래 난 내게 남된 제겐에 매나 주게 인지 냠는 제투 곰싱 말고 마시는 인지 규례기 돼야 매러와 다 라메기 투제 넘바 상예다 라메기 마 남된 제게 여바 있네야 소수기 될야 베제 마치바나 아니 인지규리기 돼요 말와 제자디 개발라 소수기 베제 냠는 지고 그래 난 소수기 베제를 시마 남된 지가 여바이네 나한줄에 인지 계게 사본지 누버지 당보네 매나 내가 제겸네 갈래겸네 그 기돼요 말와 제자 때 누버지 요고 그래 제자디 누버데 숨 초발에 때네 안에 나한줄에 인지 계게 누버데 여바지 안델야 안지게 람메다 상이기 바 람된지 진랍되어 여바체 진랍 람데 진랍스는 나도 람된데 지역을서 바 람데 여바체 다디 데 여바들 소소라는 게 베스지 검샤바이나 디숨 초발에 때네 나주길에 니제리 야야도 인지게 두고와 제가 디숨 나네 직마사나 니지 마치 하서 제고 기마도 제가 인지 줄에 끼에서야 되다 기 망고주 초발에 때네 끼디고 마도 긴 현지라 마도고 랑신기 끼려지 랑공원에 끼와디 매봤다. 그래서 랑공원에 끼와지 매바데 가르선 현지를 망불을 뛰는 끼고 그래와. 그래서 자위게 사번지래 뛰고 그래. 안에 델이야 공발에 랑기 배준 제발에 뛰고 그래. 안델이야 람든지겐 라마다 안에 사이기 진랍래 뛰고 그래. 그래서 디숨과 뛰발에 뛰네 맞을 인지 끼고 그래. 그래서 디 초발에 뛰네 그래. 마도 인지해야 돼. 강라에 마도 호랑원이 주바제요 말에 끼게요 말에서.
just to really drive this point home, that you should apply this understanding of dependent arising broadly. Take the concept of the generation of compassion. So to generate compassion on our continuum, if we take that as an illustration, compassion as an object will appear to our consciousness as being self-existent, independent. But when we investigate, it cannot exist in this way. If it were existent by way of its own nature, inherently existent, it would be unconnected from anything at all. It would be there or not there, and it could not change. But in reality, we all have the capacity to generate compassion on our continuum. And why? Because the founder Buddha appeared in this world, and he illuminated the path by which practitioners could generate compassion. And an unbroken lineage of practitioners have been doing exactly that, cultivating the causes precisely in accordance with how it was taught by the Buddha, and generating compassion in their continuum. And this unbroken lineage has continued to our lamas today. So not only, so therefore, compassion can be generated because the Buddha has appeared in this world and taught, and there's an unbroken lineage of realized beings through to this present day. But those aren't the only causes that are required, because we are taking the generation of compassion on our own continuum. And here, the causes I've mentioned are the Buddha and the lineage of lamas. So the crucial cause that is also required is the seed of compassion on our own continuum. If this were lacking, how could we generate compassion on our own continuum? But because we have this, because there's the blessings of the Buddha through him appearing in the world, the abiding lineage right through to our present Lama, the teachings that we receive being a further cause, and our effort to nurture and cultivate and develop the seed on our continuum, through all those causes coming together, compassion can be generated within our own continuum by ourselves. If compassion were inherently existent, no causes could impact on it. And therefore, whether the Buddha had appeared in the world or not, whether we had met a teacher, a qualified teacher or not, whether we made effort or not, whether we had imprints or not, would make no difference to the presence or absence of compassion on our continuum. But that's not the case. It is too a dependent arising.
And Jidanga, Jiso, Lobsang Dorje, some Davina, Darwa, Puripu Yawachi Yobache, Ripube Yawayobache, and the Chik Lobsang Chegi, Pene Ki Rujayaki, Dunya, Dumbashu Yobache, Yobania, Anekasore, Besu Chevene, Lapkenji Mena, Shia Marwa, Jitsangu. That in Kuki Lapken Yawachi Yobache, so Ripuche Yawayobaine. 다 소설이야 디 자에게 배수 맞제바나 하시에 신하여 말아와 어디네 자다 소설이 랍칸 야고여 바체 소설이 안지기 자에게 리바여 바체 다고 자에게 리바기네 매바나 고 신하여 말아와 자 리바여 바체 리바고 강사네 다 리바여 와다 셰바여 바 리바여 바체 다들 소설이 배수 제바이나 디숨 소발에 때네 저기 롭장 제에 가르쳐베나 장투고로 와다 단 디숨 맞춰바네 지가 라펜 약고 요베네 소소라는 게 지 맞아바나 베제 맞아바나 마싱바디 용고바디 가지 뭐서 통고로 와다 통치수기 뭐 예들 와 대 장야게 베제 제에 제 되바다 듬바다 베제 제 요바나야 아니 라펜 메네 롭장 마싱에 망고로 와 디네요와 디자자 지상 롭장 약고 차바들에 기 약고 지고야 지다 안델야 아는 소수기 베제 약고 제바 튕긴 대솔을 때네 하는 것을 롭장 약고 차기로 와 디나신 당한 저기 가르스네 대시 닌지콤바 닌지콤 제들야 안 대시 나신 랍칸 럽든지간 라마다 아니 상기기 진랍 안 소수기 배준 제바 안디 니지기에 뉴비게 뉴바시여바 될때네 니지기고 그래서 나는 아주 지바잘 제가 강라 뛰내지 두고 마도 아주 지단기다 취유 토네 냠는지 림바이나다 직시엔지 기엔지 창네 뛰내 두고 뛰내 야게 두고 그래 나 지속이 다 롭종으로 신나 려가나자 직되네 배수진 직되네 이야기 두고 맞아봐 이내가 매로와 제가 되네자 친한 같은 삼답에는 시행지를 되네 주어마도 맞아봐 주어서야 돼 랑원 주저 자와기네 민도 선배 삼로 지리고 그래봐.
An illustration that you'll all be very familiar with is when if a school child is intelligent and has a strong wish to gain an education, but they live in a place where education is not accessible, perhaps it's denied to them. Despite their intelligence and their desire, they will not be able to become educated because the causes to be educated cannot be accumulated. There'll be others who have perhaps access to wonderful teachers and are intelligent, but they make no effort. They take it for granted, they're a little lazy, not interested, and therefore they remain uneducated because all of the required causes are not accumulated. And there are others who have great teachers, who have great desire to be educated, but they lack, they have a severe mental impediment, and therefore the causes are not accumulated, and they cannot become educated. So this is something we see in society, that causes need to come together, not just some, but all of them, and then the result will come. If one has access to excellent teachers, if one has intelligence, and if one makes effort, one will become educated. So we know this in society, and there'll be many other illustrations in society, because all desired results in society are dependent arisings. The causes in their entirety need to be accumulated. Then the result will naturally follow. And this is very much the case too with our spiritual development. With each and every spiritual goal that you'd like to achieve, whether it's compassion, realization of emptiness, calm abiding, whichever it may be, one needs, taking as an illustration of compassion, blessings of the Buddha, the continuity of the lineage as represented by our Lama. We need the seed on our continuum, and we need to make effort. When those causes come together, the result will follow, because it's a dependent arising. And this is the case with every realization we long for. Gather the causes, and the desired result will follow.
Denige tiene tubugo de gohedi kechimo dene zada tiene tugore sajang to tingu because that just to shikanse shenchile tiene tubamato madeba tuya marese. Za dene zada juge jizada tiene tuguena da anjugula ane karesene ni지 고미야 ni지 사빈딩 아주길 요래요 말해서 요바로 와당 아주게 지 소스 가리네 가 ni지 선배 삼로 주요로 와다 사빈디래 지자다 델레야 롭든 지게 당 아주다 직도 ni지 고미야게 남된 지게데 요대 바제 지자다 소스라는 게 배주시에 배지 ni지 고바이나 다 ni지게 이야기 뭐 고네 고도 패데 되네 지 공공회 줘요 바다 덴델레트네 장수심 계여봐 안 델레트네 상요고와 투기여봐디 지자다 동반이 또바네 레윤제세야당 지딘진 저와체데 배 야후 신고여봐서 되네자 다 델레야 안 냠는 지할래 보보다 셈슈 아니 마치 셈슈 마차봐 안 보고치부 보보 용하다 안 배주치 돼야 야후 야가 용기서라다 용고레식으로 와다 지자 되네자 동반이 또바이나 장수심다 니지 공발라 공모 공배드 배래 배 마시 누버침보다 신뢰야 판도드외야래 배 누버침보야 도야 되네자 가르스네 뛰는 누구요 봐 세부 띵긴 두타다 하고도 지 내가 지기 제타다 하고나 가린다 둠데 우려 조고 제시하고 하 먹은 되게 레라워치나 하 먹은 데는 망고시고다 지지 말이면 망고시고 깔래 되네 망고고데 깔래가 되는 제마도 제가도 제나디 제라다 하고도 남사 제 투고로 디네 엔자 디 농번이 또 봐이나 디니기다 디니기 남자 하고도 디니지 고미하다 전주심과 남냠는 제알이야 아니 현된 제발이야 아니 현이 동안 디기 두별이야 빼마서 하바도 아니 닝둡체다 베지 야 가서 야 두투고래 제 레균제다 녀바 빼마서 녀바냐다 디니 레균제 녀바 고니도 디 디봉게로도 야불리도 그래 제 디봉야다 개와 두별데 베지 야불리도 그래 제 네, 땡유 지지단다. 대한적인 지단도시.
I encourage you then to reflect in the way that are presented here on dependent arising, how all phenomena are dependent arisings. There's such benefit in doing this. One of the benefits would be that if one is reflecting that something is a dependent arising, one also recognizes it's empty of inherent existence. Moreover, one can recognize that because phenomena are dependent arisings, anything we hope to achieve through accumulating the causes, we can accumulate them. We can achieve that goal. Anything we wish to abandon, through not accumulating those causes, and through accumulating the contrary causes, the antidotes, we can abandon those faults too. Nothing is beyond us. So I'll repeat the illustration of compassion, and you apply it to all your other desired spiritual goals. The Buddha has appeared and presented the path. The lineage has remained unbroken, which means there are realized teachers who can illuminate the path for us. In other words, they can not only pass on the knowledge, but guide us in how to integrate and generate those realizations within us. And therefore, and moreover, compassion, the seed for compassion, exists on our continuum. All that is required is us to make a sustained effort. And then, we too can become bodhisattvas. And if we become bodhisattvas, then Buddhahood is attainable for us. So this then is the second reason why I encourage you to reflect on dependent arising, is to recognize that what is possible for all of us. We are ordinary people. We are not particularly extraordinary in this world, but we do have extraordinary capacity. And this is largely unrecognized. By reflecting on dependent arising, we come to recognize our true potential. And this is so important. It is absolutely essential because it leads to the generation of self-confidence, of an indispensable strength of mind. And why is the self-confidence and strength of mind indispensable? Because it gives us the courage to turn away from what we are habituated to turn away from what lacks meaning, and apply ourselves to what is meaningful, and to live a meaningful life. It gives us the courage to not keep doing what's easy because we are habituated to it, but to do what we know is important, although it feels difficult, because we are not yet habituated to it. We'll know that by applying ourselves, we are creating causes, and we're becoming habituated, and it will become easier, and the goal will be realized. We'll have confidence that this effort we're applying will bear fruit, and therefore it's worthwhile. So this then is a key reason why it's important to reflect on dependent arising. The other reason, going back to what I said initially, is that realizing emptiness is very difficult. But by reflecting on dependent arising, we will give confidence too that realizing emptiness is possible. Because, just like anything in life, any skill we acquired, at first was difficult. We acquired more experience, became easier. Or if we try and do something that we have no knowledge or experience in, we're fumbling about in the dark. It doesn't go well because we've lacked the accumulation of causes. But to realize emptiness, we keep accumulating knowledge and applying that knowledge through reflection in the way we advised. And in this way, we accumulate the causes. And even for us, we can realize emptiness. This is not beyond us. So therefore, I encourage you to reflect on dependent arising. And you reflect on dependent arising both in terms of the positive qualities, the virtuous qualities you want to develop. Reflecting on dependent arising aids your understanding of karma. And then the companion is in terms of the unwholesome habituations that you want to abandon. By reflecting on dependent arising, which aids one's understanding of karma, it's so much easier to abandon our negative mental tendencies. So the whole path opens up for us through this development of inner confidence and strength of mind that will come if you reflect broadly and regularly on dependent arising.
Lamde yoba tela sosogi pesuche chambaina nga zugi nicho komyada da tomba nyu komyada chasan dusine yake dus trotu yake dinegi shen twene ane tubu ore sache dine sonyo de da dinegi chuyo de da nga zui da ane da jige jamni ji komyada dine gewe shin jik kodu diwa meba ine ane kashi ore sebe samlo yonsi urwada gewe shin yen jamde meba ine ane kari shu ore sache shuyaragi marwas ane dine 냥칭 냠는 제알라 바체디 야고용 투구 말에 세디 양 삼는 안에 드네 콜시기로 와 제자 라마 메나 제자 가상이 다다 디카르쇼 생한 줄레미 진랍다 아니 직두레스 아니 가상이 가르셔스나 동반이 꿈두시네 라마 양이 남 삼는 안에 드네 두디 따가래 되면 야 슈고를 하러와 제가 디리 디네 라메기 진랍다 라메 마취 송 데네기 송 데네기 아니 나 주게 곰잡 데네 집에나 아니 니지게야 돼 조고래 세드 제가 라메 메나다 아니 나 주게 Lama mena sajitele, Lama mena, Lama the shoes like Marwas. Then any Yakan store, they can say two days away, some not Yajik or that they needed all Lama de Lama de Shuyama Sataran, 2 year Galahor, the Nezangadi, chicken yamnity, Jetus and Maris and began simply shy again, the near Yom Massiva Marwa.
As I've just been saying, to give rise to any realization, including that of emptiness, one needs to accumulate the causes, and if one, to the extent that one does so, that realization, the attainment of that realization will draw ever nearer. One needs the blessings of the Buddha, and for that, the Dharma exists in our world in an unbroken lineage. And we've met a spiritual teacher who can bring it to life for us, who can train us in how to cultivate these realizations. We require the seeds on our continuum and to make effort. And then anything is possible. We can realize compassion and become bodhisattvas. We can realize emptiness. But a concern may arise that if one isn't near one's teacher and one it feels, how can I know if I'm on the right path or not? How can I tell if I'm making an error in my meditation? Because as mentioned last night, there is a danger in many of the meditations, or rather in some of the meditations, where one can make an error thinking one has attained something when one has not.
지다병아 저 송식이 됐든 빼지대 디 라마 디나데 마 야고실로 된 소속이 지게 삼나 다인데 안 디나시 소수 삼나 코어디야 메니 빼지나 송식이 퉁기디 퉁기미도 냠내 삼다 제자제 디 빼지나는 퉁기 요반에 나 삼다와나 빼지나 셰바나지 나 삼나 리기에네 디 디기도야르다 That Bejinala, social sometimes Bejina shared Chick Martin Barjina Tata Chaya. That is that Dineza, Jugi, Bejida, Pachedita, Melon, Shergol Masodang, as the Dollar Cargu do Melon, Mena, Tatu Merva. Jazadang, Melon, Tadu, Sosu Dolia, the Cargar do the Chasachis, Melon did not see to work. Dineza, Sosu is Sem Nalia, Yargi to the room, mechanism, Tick in some tadi. Bejinala said, definite part, Yawon Lodge, the dinner the song the Tungu to Tungu. The dinner the Sumba Nashi, Tungu Banada, as the Yaman the Tidia. Tis that the Tungu Banada called Tata Chagoma, tis that dinner Zang to him. That Lama also shoe in a Lamake, Song Shu, Lamalia, and Jivatia, Jiva, Lama also shoe me and that time Jimbuda didn't so she gets some time Yamne, the Bejinalba, Depnan law, Depnan power law should be that in my dinner the Tungu about the Jita, the Danja, so on as daddy Geshe Thubten the Bejite. Give his in the Bejirochi, give his in got Lama also Tanya man at the Bejite give his in Jatagore.
So ideally, one will be able to receive teachings directly from one's Lama, and thereby also guidance in the meditation, and one can go directly to him to share one's meditation experience and check if one's on the right track or not. But for some, this just may not be possible, either their home circumstances or circumstances relating to distance. Then if you find yourself in that position, then rely on unmistaken texts. The replacement for a living Lama will be unmistaken texts. So the illustration, for example, that I've used this morning is about of the reflection in a mirror, how it appears to us, and then how to investigate if it exists in this way or not, and so forth. This is found in the classic texts. So one can rely on unmistaken text in place of a physical spiritual teacher if one's circumstances prevent one from being in the direct company of a spiritual teacher.
당한 저기 셈 나올이야 삼바 간지 코도 삼라 야다 두가다 섬직 가가가 용서서 셈이 나다의 멜로디 내가 멜로는 단하고 더 통해서가요 말아 네가를 통해서는 배지 뎁 나로야 되다 뎁는 마다는 또 배지디 뎁 나로 저때 갑라 다 소소기 셈 나라 되니 손셔교디다 다 소소기 셈 나라 다다 쳐변다 완전히 동다와나 좀 통과를 지사데 Gyönru chingaz dong melon da de gyönru chine melon tongor dinashi nganzo madik badi sem nalya anchu peji tai du dinashi jedu sem nalya jigba da madik badi chasa sem na samdang ha di dep de lo de so so samdang adi tisha di dim de sem samle de dep na ligo chasa nga jogi semgi da nganzo sem nyomo ba de sa konda nyomo sem yadugi ke khabar che yewa che melon na shin di 배지디 차도요. 배지 차고. 진짜 배지를 따봐야나 먼저 삼라 야도도 하고 두고 그래지.
If you're on your own and you want to know how your face is looking, whether it's suitable, presentable or not, then one relies on a mirror. But if one wants to know about one's mental development, know whether one's mind is getting better or worse, or going in the right direction or not, and needs an outside opinion, but one is not able to directly approach one's teacher, then one uses a text. And the unmistaken, authentic text, they will play the role of a mirror to one's mind. So therefore, if one cannot have direct access to one's teacher, then rely on authentic texts.
안디네 자당 안 주기 제사 nga juge number sangi bigi sem le ya ane ke ka sem le gyuwa ta je digi tu de sem le gyuwa ta ta chi go so zo di sung go ro je za sem le gyuwa digi sem le gyuwa ta ta de le je za da de le ya thö sam kom sum se di ji sung go je za sem le ya je za thö ba je da bo thö ba de je thö we ne ma ji thö na me zen ma be ji de du su je xia ya de ma thö ba je 퇴네 아니 야네 야도 삼당여도 아니 소수기 셈나라데 디코데 어디 딩에디 셈나 코데 딩민도 디코에데 딕샤 셈비게 다 하고 두게 제거로 제산 셈기 예와 야도디 하고 두고래 제레 삼바체데 제산 디레샤 디마레샤 하고도 다 야고디 임바 하고도 되네야 디 니보 공필 따야지 내 공부 그래서 그러다 공 변화 주기데 대시 셈제 탐제 대화다 되나 셈비게 대두스 sometimes xianle ne se de ya bu ma re se de xianle ni go ra la ka di gi de bu du a ane ra xian ni ga gang a de yung gu le se ji be jin na la xie xie ro ji za da di ya gu min de ji za jian ba da zhe wa se de ya gu re de rang la ping go re rang la xian le ping go re di gi de bu an se chi ma da mong ba la tar ba da tham ji kim be san yu go ba de yu du che go re se be xie de da jian ba da ni ji di ya gu de 퇴 삼 제베게 하고도 지자데 하고도 되네 이다 잠바다 이제 약원자도 거의 뭐 공부를 당할래야 공부 그래서 지자데 나신 아주 퇴삼 공숨 제고를 지자 퇴삼 공숨데 당한 저기 지금 낭비기 다 롭죠는 조로 제다 도시네 예침 보시고 지고로 와 지자디네
All of you gathered here or watching at home, we share the wish to transform our mind. And the unmistaken method to do so is to hear teachings, reflect, and then meditate on them. This is the unmistaken process. So the first step is to hear teachings, to read texts, and whilst doing so, contemplate their meaning, reflect on their meaning. And we do so repeatedly over a sustained period, gaining certainty, and when one has done so, then one is ready to engage in meditation. So here, one takes a teaching, for example, the teaching on abandoning harming others. So the text will present many reasons, and your teacher will illuminate those reasons. Illuminate the reasons such as the suffering that others will experience, the suffering that you yourself will experience in both this and future lives, and the hindrance that such behavior will bring to one's spiritual development. So these are the reasons that are presented in teachings and text, and whilst hearing, and again afterwards, again and again, contemplate, investigate, reflect on these reasons. And in this way, one gains certainty that I must abandon harming others in all forms, physically, verbally, even mentally. We can conclude here then for this morning. If you have some questions, then please feel free to ask. Then have a lovely lunch. Thank you.